The morning sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Dae-ho pressed his belly against the cold stone of the mountain ledge. His red scales caught the light like tiny mirrors, but his heart felt as dark as the deepest cave. Far above him, his younger sister Jiwon soared through the clouds with perfect grace. Her wings cut through the air like silver knives, and her joyful roar echoed across the valley below. Dae-ho was 300 years old, which made him barely a teenager in dragon years. By now, he should have been flying with the rest of his family. Instead, he could only watch from his lonely perch as every other dragon in the Crimson Peak clan took to the skies with ease. His wings were beautiful to look at. They stretched wide when he opened them, showing deep red membranes that sparkled in the sunlight. The other young dragons had wings just like his, but theirs worked perfectly. When they concentrated, their wings would glow with a soft magical light, and they would rise into the air as if the laws of gravity meant nothing to them. Dae-ho had tried everything.
He had practiced the ancient breathing exercises that Elder Minho taught all young dragons.
He had meditated for hours, trying to feel the magical energy that was supposed to flow through his body. He had even fasted for weeks, hoping that hunger would somehow awaken his sleeping powers. Nothing worked. His wings remained as lifeless as tree branches. The worst part was the whispers. Dragons had excellent hearing, and Dae-ho could hear every cruel word that floated up from the clan gathering areas below. They called him cursed. They said he brought shame to the proud Crimson Peak bloodline. Some of the older dragons wondered if his mother had done something wrong when she laid his egg. His mother was Yeon-suk, the clan matriarch, and one of the most respected dragons in the entire mountain range. Her scales were pure gold, and when she flew, she looked like a living star against the blue sky. She had ruled their clan for over 1,000 years with wisdom and strength. Having a flightless son was the greatest embarrassment of her long life. Yeon-suk tried to hide her disappointment, but Dae-ho could see it in her ancient golden eyes every time she looked at him. She would turn away quickly and busy herself with clan business, but the hurt was always there. The great matriarch who could solve any problem could not help her own son fly. As the morning grew warmer, Dae-ho began his daily climb down the mountain face. His claws were strong, and he had become an expert at finding handholds in the roughest stone. While his siblings flew everywhere they wanted to go, he had learned every climbing path on their mountain home. The journey took him most of the morning, but eventually he reached his favorite spot. It was a wide ledge about halfway down the mountain that gave him a perfect view of the human valley below. The other dragons thought humans were boring and weak, but Dae-ho found them fascinating. Unlike dragons, humans were not born with any magical abilities. They could not breathe fire, they did not live for thousands of years, and they certainly could not fly. Yet somehow they had learned to do amazing things. Dae-ho watched them build tall structures that reached toward the clouds. He saw their metal flying machines cross the sky, carrying passengers from place to place. The humans never gave up. When their first attempts at something failed, they tried again with a different approach. They studied problems from every angle and came up with clever solutions. Dae-ho admired their determination, even though he knew his clanmates would laugh at him for caring about such weak creatures. There was one human in particular who caught Dae-ho's attention. His name was Hyun-woo, and he worked in a small building at the edge of the valley. Dae-ho had been watching him for months now, and he could see that the human was some kind of inventor or builder. Every day, Hyun-woo would arrive at his workshop before dawn and work until long after sunset. Strange sounds came from the building throughout the day. Sometimes there were loud crashes followed by frustrated shouting. Other times there were rhythmic hammering sounds or the whir of spinning machines. Hyun-woo was young for a human, probably no more than 25 years old. He had thick black hair that was always messy from running his hands through it when he was thinking. His clothes were usually covered in grease stains and metal shavings. Dae-ho could see him through the windows, hunched over work tables covered with tools and strange devices. What impressed Dae-ho most was that Hyun-woo never seemed to give up. When one of his inventions exploded or fell apart, the human would clean up the mess and start over with a new design. He would work for days on a single project, making tiny adjustments and improvements until it finally worked the way he wanted. Dae-ho wondered what it would feel like to have that kind of determination. The dragon had tried to fly for decades, but each failure made him want to give up a little more. Watching Hyun-woo work reminded him that some problems took time to solve. Maybe if he kept trying, he would eventually find a way to get off the ground. The afternoon was growing late when Daeho heard the familiar sound of wing beats above him. His sister Ji-won landed gracefully on the ledge beside him, her silver scales shimmering in the fading light. Ji-won was 200 years younger than Daeho, but she had been flying since she was barely 50 years old. She was kind to him, unlike many of their clanmates, but even her sympathy sometimes made him feel worse about his condition. She settled down next to him and followed his gaze toward the human valley below. For a few minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching the tiny figures move about their business. Finally, Ji-won spoke in the gentle voice she always used with him. She asked him what he found so interesting about the humans. Were they not just weak creatures who lived for such short times that their lives barely mattered? Daeho considered her question carefully. He had never tried to explain his fascination with humans before, and he was not sure he could make her understand. After a long pause, he told her that humans were weak in body, but strong in spirit. They could not fly, but they had built machines that carried them through the air. They could not breathe fire, but they had learned to make fire serve their needs. Most importantly, he said, humans never seemed to accept that something was impossible. When they faced a problem they could not solve, they found another way around it. They did not have the natural gifts that dragons were born with, so they had learned to create their own gifts through intelligence and hard work. Ji-won listened thoughtfully to her brother's words. She had never thought about humans in that way before. To her, they had always seemed like ants, too small and brief to be worthy of attention. But she could hear the respect in Daeho's voice when he talked about them. She asked him if he thought humans might have some kind of wisdom that could help him with his flying problem. The question surprised Daeho, and he was quiet for a long time as he considered it. Down in the valley below, smoke was rising from Hyunwoo's workshop. But this was not the usual thin stream that came from his forge. This was thick black smoke that spoke of something gone terribly wrong. Even from their great height, both dragons could hear the distant sound of an explosion echoing off the valley walls. Daeho felt his heart begin to race as he realized that his favorite human might be in serious danger. For the first time in his life, his inability to fly truly mattered to someone other than himself. Without thinking about the danger or the rules that kept dragons and humans apart, Daeho launched himself from the ledge. His sister Ji-won called out in alarm, but he was already moving down the mountain face as fast as his claws could carry him. The climb that usually took him hours now became a desperate race against time. Daeho used every shortcut he had discovered during his long years of being unable to fly. He leapt from rock to rock, slid down smooth stone faces, and swung from sturdy tree branches that grew from cracks in the cliff. His powerful claws sparked against the stone as he scrambled downward. Small rocks broke loose and tumbled into the valley below. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it echoing in his chest. All he could think about was reaching Hyunwoo before it was too late. The thick black smoke was getting worse as Daeho got closer to the valley floor. He could smell burning wood, hot metal, and something chemical that made his nose sting. Orange flames were now visible through the windows of the workshop, and he could hear things exploding inside the building. When Daeho finally reached the bottom of the mountain, he ran across the valley floor faster than he had ever moved before. His huge body crashed through bushes and small trees. His tail left a deep furrow in the soft earth behind him. Animals scattered in terror as the massive red dragon thundered toward the burning building. The workshop was worse than it had looked from above. The roof had partially collapsed and one entire wall had been blown outward by some kind of explosion. Thick smoke poured from every opening, making it hard to see inside. The heat was so intense that even Daeho, who was used to dragon fire, had to squint his eyes. Through the smoke and flames, he could see a human-shaped figure pinned under a heavy wooden beam near the back of the workshop. The person was not moving, and more burning debris was falling from the damaged ceiling every few seconds. Daeho knew he was too big to fit through the front door, so he used his powerful shoulder to smash through what remained of the damaged wall. Wood and stone scattered as his bulk forced an opening large enough for him to squeeze through. The inside of the workshop was a maze of overturned tables, scattered tools, and burning materials. The air was so thick with smoke that Daeho had to hold his breath to keep from coughing. He could barely see 3 feet in front of his snout. Following his nose and his excellent hearing, Daeho made his way toward the trapped human. The wooden beam that had fallen was massive, probably weighing more than 10 humans put together. It had pinned the person's legs, and there was no way a human could lift it alone. For Dae-ho, however, the beam was no heavier than a large branch. He carefully positioned his jaws around it and lifted it clear with one smooth motion. Then he gently scooped up the unconscious human in his front claws, being extra careful not to damage the fragile body with his sharp talons. The person was definitely Hyunwoo, though he looked much smaller and more fragile up close than he had from the mountain ledge. His clothes were torn and dirty, and there was blood on his forehead where something had struck him. But he was breathing, and Dae-ho could hear his heart beating steadily. Carrying the injured human with the same care he might use to handle a bird's egg, Dae-ho backed out of the burning workshop. Once they were outside and away from the smoke, he set Hyunwoo down gently in the soft grass near a small stream. The cool air seemed to help the human recover. His eyes fluttered open, and for a moment he stared up at Dae-ho with complete confusion. Then his eyes went wide with shock as he realized he was looking at a dragon's face just a few feet away from his own. Hyunwoo tried to sit up quickly, but pain shot through his injured legs and he fell back with a gasp. He was clearly terrified, but he was also trying to figure out what had happened to him. His eyes darted from Dae-ho's massive head to the burning ruins of his workshop and back again. Dae-ho spoke carefully, using the human language he had learned from listening to conversations in the valley. His voice was deep and rumbling, but he tried to make it as gentle as possible. He told Hyunwoo not to be afraid and that he was not going to hurt him. The human's mouth fell open in amazement. He had probably never heard a dragon speak before, since most dragons considered human language beneath their dignity to learn. Hyunwoo asked in a shaky voice why Dae-ho had saved him. His words came out in short gasps because of the pain from his injuries. But Dae-ho could understand him clearly. This was a question that Dae-ho had not expected, and he found himself struggling to find the right words. He could have said that all life was precious, or that he believed in helping those in need. But the real truth was simpler and more personal than that. He told Hyunwoo that he had been watching him work for many months. He had seen how the human never gave up on his projects even when they failed over and over again. He had admired Hyunwoo's determination and creativity from afar. When he saw the workshop burning and realized that the human might die, Dae-ho said, he could not just sit on his mountain and watch it happen. It did not matter that they were different species, or that dragons and humans usually stayed away from each other. Hyunwoo was in trouble, and Dae-ho was the only one who could help. The human stared at him with wide eyes as he processed this explanation. Slowly, some of the fear faded from his expression and was replaced by curiosity and wonder. Hyunwoo said he had sometimes felt like someone was watching him while he worked. He had even caught glimpses of movement on the mountain cliffs, but he had never imagined it might be a dragon taking an interest in his projects. He tried to sit up again, more carefully this time, and managed to prop himself against a nearby rock. His legs were badly bruised but not broken, which was better than either of them had hoped. Looking at the smoldering remains of his workshop, Hyunwoo's shoulders sagged with disappointment. Years of work and all of his tools had been destroyed in a matter of minutes. The explosion had been caused by an experimental engine he was building, and now everything was gone. Dae-ho felt sorry for the human's loss. He knew what it was like to have hopes and dreams crushed by circumstances beyond your control. He told Hyunwoo that he was sad about the workshop, but that the important thing was that the human was alive and would recover from his injuries. Hyunwoo looked up at the massive dragon with surprise. He said he had not expected such kindness from one of the great flying creatures that lived in the mountains. Most humans thought dragons were proud and distant beings who cared nothing for the problems of smaller creatures. Dae-ho felt a bitter laugh rumble in his chest. He told Hyunwoo that he might be surprised to learn that not all dragons could fly. In fact, there was at least one dragon who had never left the ground under his own power. The human looked confused by this statement, and his engineer's mind immediately began working on the puzzle. He studied Dae-ho's magnificent wings, which were currently folded against his back, and asked if something was wrong with them. Dae-ho explained that his wings looked perfect and were strong enough to carry his weight. The problem was not with his body, but with the magic that all dragons were supposed to possess. Without the mystical connection that allowed his kind to control the forces of flight, his wings were nothing more than decoration. Hyunwoo listened to this explanation with growing fascination. He had spent his entire life solving mechanical problems, figuring out why things did not work and finding ways to fix them. The idea of a flightless dragon presented the kind of challenge that made his mind race with possibilities. He told Daeho that magic was something he knew nothing about, but flight was a problem he understood very well. He had been building flying machines for years, studying how birds soared through the air and trying to copy their methods with metal and wood. Maybe, Hyunwoo suggested carefully, there was more than one way for a dragon to fly. If magic would not work, perhaps they could find another solution together. Daeho stared at the small human who had just offered to help solve a problem that had defeated dragon elders and magic experts for centuries. The idea seemed impossible, but then again, so had the thought of a human and a dragon having a friendly conversation. For the first time in years, Daeho allowed himself to feel a tiny spark of hope. Over the next few days, Hyunwoo's legs healed enough for him to walk around slowly. Daeho stayed close by, helping the human gather salvageable materials from his ruined workshop. The dragon's strength made it easy to move heavy beams and clear away debris that would have taken Hyunwoo weeks to handle alone. During their work together, they talked constantly. Hyunwoo asked hundreds of questions about dragon anatomy and flight abilities. He wanted to understand exactly how magical flight was supposed to work, even though Daeho had never experienced it himself. Daeho explained that according to dragon lore, flight magic came from within. Young dragons were taught to feel for a warm energy deep in their chests near their hearts. When they found this energy and learned to control it, they could make their bodies lighter than air. The magic would flow through their wings and lift them skyward without any effort. The process was supposed to be as natural as breathing. Dragon children usually achieved their first flight by accident, often while playing or during moments of strong emotion. Once they knew what the feeling was like, they could call upon it whenever they wanted to fly. Hyunwoo listened carefully to these explanations, but his engineer's mind kept looking for logical reasons why the magic might not work. He asked Daeho if he had ever felt even a tiny bit of the warm energy that other dragons described. Daeho thought about this question seriously. He told Hyunwoo that sometimes, when he was very excited or very upset, he did feel something stirring in his chest. It was like a small flame trying to grow larger, but it always faded away before he could grab hold of it. This gave Hyunwoo an idea. He suggested that they try some experiments to see if they could find ways to make that feeling stronger. Maybe Daeho's magic was not broken, but just needed a different approach to wake it up. They spent several days trying different techniques. Hyunwoo had Daeho try deep breathing exercises while concentrating on happy memories. They experimented with different body positions and wing movements. They even tried having Daeho run and leap from small hills while focusing on the sensation in his chest. Nothing worked. The tiny spark of warmth that Daeho sometimes felt never grew into the powerful energy that should lift him into the air. After each failed attempt, he felt more discouraged than before. But Hyunwoo refused to give up. He told Daeho that failed experiments were not really failures at all. They were just ways of learning what did not work, which brought them closer to finding what would work. The human began studying Daeho's wings from a completely different angle. Instead of thinking about magic, he looked at them as mechanical structures. He measured their span, examined the membrane thickness, and calculated how much lift they should be able to generate through pure aerodynamics. What he discovered amazed both of them. Daeho's wings were perfectly designed for flight, even without magic. They had the right shape, the correct proportions, and more than enough surface area to lift his body weight. According to all the mathematical formulas that Hyunwoo knew, Daeho should be able to fly using nothing but wind and physics. Hyunwoo shared his calculations with Daeho, spreading his papers out on a flat rock near their campsite. He showed the dragon detailed drawings of bird wings, airplane wings, and dragon wings, pointing out the similarities in their basic design. The problem, Hyunwoo explained, was not that Daeho could not fly. The problem was that he had been trying to fly the wrong way. Magic might work for other dragons, but it was not the only path to the sky. Daeho stared at the drawings and numbers, trying to understand what Hyunwoo was telling him. The human was suggesting that flight could be achieved through knowledge and technique instead of mystical power. It was a completely revolutionary idea that went against everything dragons believed about themselves. Hyunwoo could see the doubt in Daeho's amber eyes. He understood why the dragon found it hard to accept this new possibility. Dragons had been using magic to fly for thousands of years. The idea that there might be another way probably seemed impossible. To help explain his point, Hyunwoo walked over to a small model airplane that he had salvaged from his workshop. It was made of wood and cloth with a simple design that mimicked the shape of a bird's wings. He wound up the rubber band motor and released the plane into the air. The little aircraft soared smoothly across the clearing, staying aloft for nearly a minute before gently landing in the grass. It had no magic, no mystical energy, and no living spirit, yet it flew beautifully using nothing but the laws of physics. Daeho watched the demonstration with growing excitement. If a simple wooden toy could fly without magic, then maybe a living dragon could do the same thing. He asked Hyunwoo to explain exactly how the model airplane worked. Hyunwoo was delighted to share his knowledge. He talked about airflow, lift, thrust, and drag. He explained how the curved shape of a wing created different air pressures above and below, generating an upward force. He described how forward movement was essential for creating the airflow that made lift possible. Most importantly, he told Daeho that flight was not a mysterious gift that some creatures had and others lacked. It was a skill that could be learned through practice and understanding. Birds were not born knowing how to fly perfectly. They had to learn through trial and error just like any other ability. Daeho felt his heart begin to race as he absorbed these ideas. For the first time in his life, flying seemed like something that might actually be possible for him, not through magic that had always been beyond his reach, but through knowledge and practice that he could control. He asked Hyunwoo where they should start. What was the first step in learning to fly without magic? Hyunwoo grinned and pointed to a gentle slope that led down from the mountains toward the valley floor. He said they would start with the basics just like the Wright brothers had done when they invented the first human flying machine. They would begin with gliding. The plan was simple but logical. Instead of trying to achieve powered flight right away, Daeho would learn to control his movement through the air during short glides. Once he mastered the basic techniques of steering and landing, they could work on generating enough speed and lift for true flight. Hyunwoo explained that gliding would teach Daeho how his wings affected his movement through the air. He would learn to feel the wind patterns and understand how small adjustments in wing position could change his direction and speed. Daeho was nervous, but eager to try. They climbed to a low hill that offered a gentle slope and steady wind conditions. Hyunwoo positioned himself at the bottom of the hill where he could observe Daeho's technique and offer suggestions. For his first attempt, Daeho simply ran down the hill with his wings spread wide. He had done this many times before during his failed attempts at magical flight, but this time felt different. Instead of trying to summon mystical energy, he focused on the wind flowing over his wings and the sensation of air pressure building beneath them. He did not achieve true flight on that first run, but something remarkable happened. For just a few seconds, as he reached the bottom of the hill, his feet left the ground entirely. He was not falling or stumbling. He was actually gliding through the air under his own control. The moment lasted only about 3 seconds before he touched down again, but it was enough to prove that Hyunwoo's theory was correct. Daeho could fly without magic. He just needed to learn how to do it properly. Both dragon and human erupted in cheers of excitement. After centuries of believing that he was cursed or broken, Daeho had finally experienced real flight. It was not the effortless soaring that other dragons achieved through magic, but it was genuine. Honest flight earned through understanding and effort. As they celebrated this breakthrough, neither of them realized that they were being watched from the mountain peaks above. Several dragons had gathered to see what their Flightless clan member was doing with the strange human, and word of this unusual partnership was already spreading through the dragon community. The next few weeks were filled with hard work and many crashes. Daeho practiced gliding every day, starting from higher and higher points on the mountain slope. Each attempt taught him something new about controlling his movement through the air. At first, his landings were terrible. He would hit the ground hard and tumble forward, scraping his scales and bruising his pride. But Hyunwoo was always there to encourage him and point out what he was doing right as well as what needed improvement. Slowly, Daeho began to understand how his wings worked. He learned that spreading them wide gave him more lift but also more drag, which slowed him down. Angling them slightly backward helped him glide farther but made steering more difficult. His tail, he discovered, was like a rudder that could help him turn left or right. The hardest part was learning to land safely. Unlike other dragons who could simply stop flying whenever they wanted to touch down, Daeho had to plan his landings carefully. He needed to judge his speed and height, then adjust his wing angle to slow down at just the right moment. Hyunwoo built a series of markers on the hillside to help Dae-ho practice hitting specific landing spots. They started with a target area the size of a small house, then gradually made it smaller as Dae-ho's accuracy improved. After 2 weeks of daily practice, Dae-ho could glide for almost a full minute and land within a few feet of where he aimed. But both friends knew that gliding was just the first step. True flight required the ability to gain height and stay in the air for as long as desired. Hyunwoo spent his evenings studying books about bird flight and airplane design. He watched eagles and hawks soaring over the valley, taking careful notes about how they used wind currents to stay aloft without flapping their wings constantly. The breakthrough came when Hyunwoo noticed something interesting about the way birds took off. They did not just jump into the air and start flapping. Instead, they would run forward to build up speed, then use that forward motion to help generate lift when they spread their wings. He explained this discovery to Dae-ho using a simple example. When you stick your hand out the window of a moving cart, the wind pushes against it. If you angle your hand upward, the wind will try to lift it higher. The faster the cart moves, the stronger the lifting force becomes. Dae-ho's wings could work the same way. If he could run fast enough before takeoff, the air flowing over his wings would create enough lift to carry him into the sky. The key was getting enough speed before leaving the ground. They found a long, straight stretch of land at the bottom of the valley that would give Dae-ho plenty of room to build up speed. Hyunwoo marked off distances so they could measure how fast the dragon was moving when he attempted takeoff. The first few tries were disappointing. Dae-ho would run as fast as he could, spread his wings, and leap into the air, but he would still crash back to the ground after only a few seconds. His running speed was not quite enough to generate the lift he needed. Hyunwoo realized they needed to find a way to help Dae-ho go even faster. He remembered watching birds launch themselves from high cliffs, using the downward slope to build extra speed before takeoff. They found a perfect spot on the mountainside where a long, gentle slope led down to the valley floor. The incline was not too steep to be dangerous, but it was enough to help Dae-ho reach higher speeds than he could achieve on flat ground. On the day of their first real flight attempt, both friends were nervous and excited. Dae-ho positioned himself at the top of the slope while Hyunwoo waited at the bottom with paper and pencil to record what happened. Dae-ho took several deep breaths and focused on everything he had learned over the past weeks. He spread his wings slightly to test the wind direction, then folded them tight against his body. When he was ready, he began to run. His powerful legs carried him down the slope faster than he had ever moved before. The wind whistled past his ears and his heart pounded with excitement and fear. Halfway down the slope, he spread his wings wide and felt the familiar sensation of air pressure building beneath them. This time was different. Instead of the brief glide he had experienced before, Dae-ho felt himself being lifted higher and higher into the air. His feet were no longer touching the ground, and he was not falling. He was actually flying. The sensation was incredible. Wind rushed over his scales and through his wing membranes. The ground fell away beneath him as he soared over treetops and rocky outcroppings. For the first time in his 300 years of life, Dae-ho was seeing the world from a dragon's proper perspective. He stayed in the air for almost 3 minutes, gliding in a wide circle over the valley before coming in for a landing near where Hyunwoo waited. His touchdown was not perfect, but he managed to stay on his feet instead of tumbling forward. Both friends were so excited they could barely speak. Dae-ho had done it. He had achieved real, sustained flight without using any magic at all. The impossible had become possible through friendship, science, and determination. But their celebration was interrupted by a sound that made both of them look up in alarm. A deep, powerful roar echoed across the valley, and when they looked toward the mountain peaks, they saw several large shapes descending rapidly toward their location. Dae-ho's family had finally decided to investigate what their flightless member was doing with the human. Elder dragons were flying down from the clan's mountain home, and they did not look pleased about what they had witnessed. The lead dragon was Dae-ho's uncle, an ancient creature named Taimin whose scales were dark blue and whose temper was legendary even among dragons. Behind him flew 2 other elders and Dae-ho's mother, Yeon-suk. They landed in a semicircle around Dae-ho and Hyunwoo, their great wings stirring up dust and small rocks. Their expressions were a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. The sight of their flightless clan member soaring through the air had challenged everything they believed about dragon nature and magic. Taemin spoke first, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. He demanded to know what dark magic the human had used to give Daeho the power of flight. He accused Hyunwoo of corrupting their young clan member with forbidden arts. Hyunwoo stepped forward bravely, despite being surrounded by creatures that could each destroy him with a single breath of fire. He explained that no magic had been used at all. Daeho had learned to fly through understanding, practice, and the same physical laws that governed all moving things. The elder dragons exchanged skeptical glances. The idea that flight could be achieved without magic was so foreign to their thinking that they could barely comprehend it. One of them demanded that Daeho demonstrate his abilities immediately. Daeho felt nervous with his entire family watching, but he was also proud of what he had accomplished. He climbed back to the top of the slope, positioned himself carefully, and began his takeoff run exactly as Hyunwoo had taught him. Once again, he achieved beautiful, controlled flight that carried him high above the valley floor, but this time, instead of landing quickly, he decided to show off a little. He executed several turns and even attempted a simple loop, demonstrating that his new flying skills were real and reliable. When he finally landed, the assembled dragons were silent for a long moment. They had witnessed something that their ancient knowledge said was impossible, yet they could not deny the evidence of their own eyes. Yeon-suk, who had been quiet during the confrontation, finally stepped forward to examine her son more closely. She looked into his amber eyes and saw something there that had been missing for centuries. Confidence, pride, joy. Her flightless son had found his wings after all. Yeon-suk approached her son slowly, her golden eyes studying every detail of his appearance. She could see that something fundamental had changed in Daeho. The defeated, ashamed dragon she had known was gone. In his place stood a confident young dragon who held his head high with genuine pride. She asked him to explain exactly what had happened. How had he learned to fly without the magic that had always been beyond his reach? Daeho looked at Hyunwoo, who nodded encouragingly, then began to tell his story. He explained how the human had saved his life during the workshop fire, and how their friendship had grown from that first meeting. He described Hyunwoo's studies of his wings and the discovery that flight was possible through science. Instead of magic, the elder dragons listened with growing amazement as Daeho explained concepts like lift, thrust, and aerodynamics. These were ideas that no dragon had ever considered before. They had always believed that flight was a mystical gift that could not be learned or earned through effort. Uncle Taemin interrupted with a harsh question. He wanted to know if Daeho was claiming that dragon magic was useless, that thousands of years of tradition and knowledge meant nothing. Daeho carefully explained that he was not criticizing magical flight or suggesting that other dragons should abandon their natural abilities. He had simply found a different path to the same destination. Some dragons could fly through magic, and he could fly through understanding physics. Both methods worked. They were just different approaches. Hyunwoo added that in his studies he had learned that many problems could be solved in multiple ways. Just because one solution worked well did not mean that other solutions were wrong or impossible. The important thing was finding the method that worked best for each individual. One of the other elder dragons, a female named Hyejin, asked Hyunwoo why he had chosen to help Daeho. What did a human gain from teaching a dragon to fly? Hyunwoo thought carefully about his answer. He said that helping others solve problems had always brought him joy, even when there was no reward involved. Watching Daeho achieve his dream of flight had been more satisfying than any of his own inventions. Sometimes the best reason to help someone was simply because it was the right thing to do. This answer seemed to surprise the dragons. They were used to thinking in terms of clan loyalty, territory, and power. The idea of helping someone from a different species just because it felt right was a new concept for most of them. Yeon-suk asked her son to demonstrate his flying abilities one more time, but this time she wanted to fly alongside him. She wanted to see up close how his method compared to traditional dragon flight. Daeho was nervous about flying next to his mother, who was one of the most graceful flyers in their clan, but he agreed to the demonstration. They both took off from the valley floor, Daeho using his running start technique and Yeon-suk rising effortlessly through magic. As they flew side by side through the afternoon sky, Yeon-suk was amazed by what she observed. Her son's flight style was completely different from anything she had ever seen. He could not hover in place like a magical dragon, and he needed more speed to stay airborne. But his movements were precise and controlled. He had clearly mastered his new abilities. More importantly, she could see the pure joy on his face as he soared through the clouds. This was not the desperate failed magic attempts of his youth. This was confident, skilled flight that he had earned through his own efforts. When they landed, Yeon-suk surprised everyone by bowing her great head toward Hyun-woo. She thanked the human for giving her son something she had never been able to provide: hope, confidence, and the ability to achieve his greatest dream. The other dragons watched this gesture with shock. Dragon matriarchs did not bow to anyone, especially not to small human creatures. But Yeon-suk felt that Hyun-woo deserved recognition for his remarkable achievement. Uncle Taemin was not ready to accept these new ideas so easily. He argued that allowing dragons to learn non-magical flight would weaken their species and corrupt their ancient traditions. What would happen to dragon culture if young dragons started seeking help from humans instead of learning from their elders? Daeho responded that learning new things did not have to mean abandoning old wisdom. He still respected dragon traditions and the knowledge of his elders. He had simply found an additional skill that worked for his particular situation. Dragons who could use magic should continue to do so. Dragons who could not might benefit from exploring other options. Hyun-woo suggested that both species might learn from each other in many ways. Dragons had knowledge about things like weather patterns, mountain geology, and long-term environmental changes that could help humans. Humans had developed technologies and scientific methods that might interest curious dragons. The idea of cooperation between their species was revolutionary, but several of the dragons found it intriguing. They had always viewed humans as too short-lived and weak to be worthy partners, but Hyun-woo had proven that humans could accomplish remarkable things despite their physical limitations. As the sun began to set, the dragons prepared to return to their mountain home. But the conversation had changed something fundamental in their relationship with both Daeho and the human community below. Yeon-suk announced that her son would be welcome to visit the clan territory whenever he wished, and that his friendship with Hyun-woo would be respected by all dragons. She also extended an invitation for the human to visit their mountain home, making him the first non-dragon to receive such an honor. Before they departed, several of the younger dragons who had been watching from a distance approached Daeho with questions. Some of them had also struggled with traditional magical flight training, and they wanted to know if Hyun-woo's methods might work for them as well. This possibility excited both Daeho and Hyun-woo greatly. If other dragons could benefit from scientific flight training, their small experiment might grow into something much larger and more important. As the dragons took to the sky for their journey home, Daeho chose to fly with them part of the way instead of climbing the mountain face as he had done for centuries. His family watched with pride and wonder as their formerly flightless member soared alongside them with confidence and grace. The sight of Daeho flying freely among his kin was a symbol of how much had changed in just a few short weeks. An impossible friendship between a dragon and a human had not only solved an ancient problem, but had opened up new possibilities that neither species had imagined before. Word of Daeho's remarkable achievement spread quickly through both the dragon and human communities. Within a few days, curious visitors began arriving at the valley to see the flightless dragon who had learned to fly through science instead of magic. The first to arrive were young dragons from other clans who had heard rumors of the impossible feat. Many of them had their own struggles with traditional magical flight, and they hoped that Hyun-woo's methods might help them as well. A young dragon named Bo-ra came from the Eastern Peaks clan. She was smaller than most dragons and had always been told that her size made magical flight more difficult. Despite years of training, she could barely stay airborne for more than a few minutes at a time. Hyun-woo examined Bo-ra's wings and body structure with the same careful attention he had given to Daeho. He discovered that her smaller size was actually an advantage for non-magical flight. She needed less speed to achieve takeoff and could maneuver more easily than larger dragons. Within a week of training, Bo-ra was flying better than she ever had before. Her small size, which had been seen as a weakness in magical flight, became a strength when she learned to use physics instead of mystical energy. Another dragon named Woo-jin arrived from the southern cliffs. He had a damaged wing from an old injury that prevented him from generating enough magical energy for sustained flight. The healers in his clan had told him he would never fly properly again, but Hyunwoo's analysis revealed that the damage did not affect the wing's aerodynamic properties. With some adjustments to his takeoff technique and landing approach, Woo Jin was soon flying as well as any healthy dragon. As more success stories spread, even dragons who could fly magically began to show interest in learning alternative methods. They were curious about this new approach to flight and wanted to understand how it worked. Hyunwoo found himself teaching basic physics and aerodynamics to dragons who had never heard such concepts before. He used simple demonstrations and examples to help them understand ideas like air pressure, wind resistance, and momentum. The dragons, in turn, shared their knowledge with Hyunwoo and the growing number of human visitors who came to observe the training sessions. They taught him about weather patterns, wind currents, and the best flying conditions for different times of day and season. This exchange of knowledge benefited both species enormously. Human engineers learned about atmospheric conditions that helped them design better flying machines. Dragons discovered scientific principles that made their own flight more efficient. Even when using magic, Daeho became a respected teacher, something he had never imagined possible during his centuries of being seen as the clan failure. Dragons who had once whispered cruel names behind his back now sought his advice and guidance. He worked closely with Hyunwoo to develop a structured training program that could help dragons with various flight difficulties. They created exercises for building wing strength, techniques for achieving proper takeoff speed, and methods for improving landing accuracy. The training ground in the valley expanded from a simple hillside into a proper academy. Human volunteers helped build runways, markers, and observation platforms. Dragons contributed by clearing flight paths and providing knowledge about local wind patterns. Students began arriving from distant regions, drawn by stories of the miraculous flight school where dragons learned to soar without magic. Some came seeking help with specific problems, while others were simply curious about this revolutionary approach to flight. Not everyone approved of these developments. Some traditional dragons worried that young dragons would become too dependent on human methods and lose their connection to ancient magical practices. A few human communities expressed concern about having so many large, powerful dragons in close contact with their settlements. But the positive results were impossible to ignore. Dragons who had never been able to fly were taking to the skies with confidence. Others who had struggled with traditional methods were discovering that scientific approaches could improve their abilities dramatically. Hyunwoo documented everything carefully, creating detailed manuals and instructional materials that could be shared with other teachers. He wanted to make sure that the knowledge they were developing would not be lost and could continue to help dragons for generations to come. The academy also became a center for broader cooperation between humans and dragons. Students from both species worked together on projects ranging from weather prediction to mountain rescue operations. The old barriers of fear and misunderstanding began to break down as individuals got to know each other. Personally, Daeho often reflected on how much his life had changed since that day when he had climbed down from his mountain to save a human from a burning workshop. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something that was transforming the relationship between their two species. He no longer spent his days alone on a cliff ledge, watching others fly while believing he never could. Instead, he soared through the skies alongside students who looked up to him as proof that any limitation could be overcome with enough determination and the right help. The dragon who had once been called cursed and flightless had become a symbol of hope and possibility. His story inspired not only other dragons with flight difficulties, but anyone who had ever been told that their dreams were impossible to achieve. Most importantly, his friendship with Hyunwoo had proven that differences between individuals or species did not have to be barriers. Sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could produce the most remarkable results. As autumn arrived in the valley, Daeho and Hyunwoo stood together watching a new group of student dragons practice their takeoff techniques. The sight of former non-flyers soaring confidently through the crisp air filled both friends with deep satisfaction. They had not only solved Daeho's personal problem, but had discovered principles and methods that would help countless others. Their small experiment in friendship and scientific curiosity had grown into something far greater than either of them had ever imagined possible. 5 years had passed since Daeho first learned to fly, and the small valley had become famous throughout the known world. The Dragon Flight Academy, as it came to be called, now welcomed students from dozens of different clans and even human settlements from distant lands. Daeho had grown into a magnificent dragon, his red scales gleaming with the confidence that came from knowing his true worth. His flying skills had become legendary, not because they relied on magic, but because they demonstrated perfect mastery of scientific principles, combined with natural dragon strength and grace. The academy grounds sprawled across the entire valley floor, with multiple runways designed for dragons of different sizes and abilities. Workshops filled with both human tools and dragon-crafted items buzzed with activity as students and teachers worked together on new projects. Hyun-woo, now recognized as one of the world's leading experts on dragon anatomy and flight mechanics, had written several books about their discoveries. His work was studied by engineers and healers in human cities and dragon communities alike. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in the relationship between the two species. What had once been mutual avoidance and suspicion had transformed into active cooperation and friendship. Dragon weather watchers now worked with human farmers to predict storms and plan harvests. Human engineers consulted with dragons when designing bridges and buildings that needed to withstand high winds. Young dragons and human children played together in mixed groups, learning each other's languages and customs. The academy had become more than just a flight school. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when different peoples chose cooperation over isolation. When they focused on solving problems together instead of maintaining old prejudices, Daeho often served as an ambassador, flying between dragon clans and human settlements to negotiate agreements and resolve conflicts. His unique position as a dragon who understood human thinking made him invaluable in building bridges between the communities. On this particular morning, Daeho was preparing for one of his favorite activities. A group of very young dragons, barely 50 years old, had arrived with their parents for their first flight training. These were dragons who had never attempted to fly before, and their parents wanted them to learn both magical and scientific methods from the beginning. Hyun-woo had developed a special program for these youngest students. Instead of forcing them to choose between magic and science, the training helped them understand both approaches and use whichever method worked best for their individual abilities and personality. Some of the young dragons took naturally to magical flight and needed only minor adjustments to their technique. Others found that scientific methods gave them better control and confidence. Most discovered that combining both approaches made them stronger and more versatile flyers than using either method alone. As Daeho watched the young dragons practice their first gliding exercises, he remembered his own early attempts at flight. The fear, the frustration, the certainty that he would never join his family in the sky. How different his life had become since then. One of the youngest students, a tiny golden dragon named Soo-jin, was having trouble with her landing approach. She kept coming in too fast and tumbling forward when her feet touched the ground. Daeho glided down to where she sat looking discouraged and settled beside her gently. He remembered feeling exactly the same way during his own training, and he knew the right words to encourage her. He told Soo-jin that learning to fly was like learning any other skill. It required patience, practice, and the willingness to make mistakes. Every dragon at the academy, including him, had crashed many times while learning. The important thing was to get up, figure out what went wrong, and try again. Soo-jin listened carefully to his advice, then asked the question that Daeho heard from almost every new student. How long would it take before she could fly as beautifully as he did? Daeho smiled, a warm expression that would have surprised the dragons who had known him in his bitter, frustrated youth. He told her that everyone learned at their own pace and that comparing herself to others would only slow her progress. The goal was not to fly like him or like anyone else, but to fly like herself. As the afternoon training session continued, Hyun-woo joined Daeho on the observation platform they had built overlooking the main runway. Both friends were older now, showing the effects of years of hard work, but their enthusiasm for their shared mission had never dimmed. They watched as Bo-ra, now an accomplished instructor herself, worked with a group of teenage dragons on advanced maneuvering techniques. Woo-jin led a mixed class of dragons and humans through aerodynamics theory, using models and diagrams to explain complex concepts in simple terms. Hyun-woo commented on how proud he was of what they had built together. When he had first suggested helping Daeho learn to fly, he had never imagined that their small experiment would grow into something that touched so many lives. Daeho replied that the most important thing they had discovered was not any specific technique or method, but the simple truth that no dream was too impossible to achieve. Every dragon who learned to fly at the academy, every human who gained new understanding about flight and cooperation, proved that limitations existed only in the mind. As the sun began to set over the valley, students and teachers from both species gathered for the daily evening flight. This had become a tradition at the academy, a time when everyone who could fly would take to the sky together in a magnificent display of unity and skill. Dragons of every size and color rose into the air, alongside human pilots in their mechanical flying machines. Some used pure magic, others relied on scientific principles, and many combined both methods in their own unique styles. The sky filled with wings and wonder, as dozens of different approaches to flight demonstrated the same basic truth that Daeho and Hyunwoo had discovered years before. There was more than one way to reach any goal, and the most beautiful achievements came from friends helping friends overcome what seemed impossible. As Daeho soared through the evening sky surrounded by students who had once believed they could never fly, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. He had started as the flightless dragon who brought shame to his clan, convinced that he was broken and worthless. Now he was a teacher, a leader, and a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been told their dreams were impossible. More importantly, he had learned that the greatest flight was not about leaving the ground behind, but about lifting others up to join you in the sky. The flightless young dragon had indeed found his wings, but in doing so, he had given wings to countless others as well, and that, both he and Hyunwoo agreed, was the most beautiful flight of all.